The Understudy of the Scarlet Script by George Roland Wills. Library, and now home. Her head ached, and her muscles were stiff from sitting so long in one position. Her neck felt tight on one side, where she'd leaned against the palm of her left hand. Her hair-enshrouded forearm elbowed firmly against the hard wooden table of the library reference room. This was her usual reading position, and this was her usual table. Good old Leanne Ashley, a good little girl, doing her studies just like she should. No surprises from Leanne. Always on time, always where she ought to be, when she ought to be there. She felt good. Work made her feel good, even though she knew it was a conditioned response. Psych 128 had shown her that much. She felt good about doing her work properly and on time, because her parents had instilled this into her during her formative years. Well, so what? If it felt good, Leanne was likely to try it, so long as she could do it in private. Leanne wasn't social, and didn't have any friends. She didn't need them. They weren't stable, the people she knew. They were college students who were just as likely to quit and go back home as they were to swallow a handful of purple microdot acid at a Friday night bash and fly out the window. Either that, or put a razor into the veins of their wrists and watch the fountain of crimson life as it drained thickly down the drain of the rusting dormitory tub. She did not need anything like that fouling up her studies. She was here to do her work and graduate. She had a terrific fear of being a casualty, of returning home to Mama and Daddy without that sheepskin excuse, of being one of the ones who would go bad, as her parents said. Leanne would have rather been gang-raped than to disappoint her mother and father in any way. She absolutely lived for their love and their attention, for the praises they would heap upon her at parties and family functions. Leanne liked to feel good, and she enjoyed reading above all else. She had her life in a nice row of ordered activities, thank you very much, and she never deviated from her own little world. She could always entertain herself, and she could see that others in her classroom were way too dependent upon some girl or boy to study sanely. There was no way that Leanne could have studied sitting next to a cute boy. No, she would be sending her rich, solitudinous imagination racing up and down the hollow marble corridors of her mind, thinking lusty, nasty little thoughts that would keep her up late at night, her breath coming in hot gasps. No, that was no way to study. In order to study, she had to come here, to the boring old reference room, and shut out all outside interference. This was easy to do, because this was the most boring room in the library, and even the librarians rarely came back this far. All around her were law books and oldish furnishings. Nothing else. She looked at her watch and smiled. 5 o'clock. Yes. Time to quit for the day. It was Friday, and she was looking forward to a long, quiet evening alone with her new novel, The Pursuit of Sundown. One of those women's novels by that new guy. She tried to recall his name and couldn't. She liked his stuff and had read him before, on the advice of a friend back home. He was a strange writer, this guy. "He's weird," Shelley had told Leanne, giving her the man's first novel to take to school with her. "But you'll like him. He's a writer of women's novels." "Are they romances?" Leanne had asked her, looking at the book she had been given. "No, that's just it. He doesn't do that sort of thing. All of his main characters are female, and the bad guys are usually guys. He shows how women can work out their own problems, and how they can save themselves. It's kinda neat in a way." "But what kind of book is it?" Leanne had demanded to know. "What genre is he writing in?" "That one is a kidnap story," Shelley had told her, "but he's got all kinds of stuff in there. Read. Read and then you tell me." Leanne had taken that book and she had read it. Shelley was right. There was no real genre to the guy. It was exactly as Shelley had described it. There was all kinds of stuff in it, and Leanne enjoyed the suspense in the book above all else. Now Leanne had seen this latest one, this Pursuit of Sundown, and had bought a copy of it at the school bookstore, rather than wait to go to the small mall over the weekend. Whatever this guy did, she enjoyed it, and couldn't wait to get into bed with it, an ice cold beer on her nightstand, and a bag of potato chips between her knees. She would have a ball tonight, all by herself. As she got up from her table, she stretched herself, and was aware of her body for the first time that day. Leanne had a nice body, one that a lot of girls would have settled for. Her breasts were tight and firm. Her bottom was rounded, and her shape appealing to the eye. She was a pretty girl in a sober sort of way. Her body would not stop traffic, nor make a tight end miss a practice pass as she walked by the old football field. But she was happy with herself. She was comfortable, and while comfortable isn't exactly enough to incite lust and wanton desire in the eyes of every male in sight, it was perfect for her. Leanne had dreams of marrying a man who had sort of the quiet, stoned dreaminess of James Spader, the actor in Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Yeah, a man like him. A man who was way calm and didn't look too much like he cared for anything nor anyone. Yeah. That way if she gained 10 pounds, he wouldn't notice it. If she redecorated the house, he wouldn't care. If she didn't want to get up on Saturday mornings, he would not either. That sort of a man. Leanne loved movies, next to reading. She would go see anything, but her favorite actress was Janie Knight, hands down. While other girls she talked to admired Sigourney Weaver or Glenn Close, Leanne was fixated on Janie Knight. Janie hadn't hit the really big time yet. She wouldn't be allowed to do Fatal Attraction, or even Aliens, but she did rate in the kind of Kim Basinger category, the continuous string of similarly plotted good movies that occasionally come out. Janie wouldn't have done Batman, but she could have done 9.5 Weeks or No Mercy. Those were in her league. The movies that everyone goes to see after Back to the Future 3. Janie was well on her way to stardom. It would be just a matter of time. Leanne was proud that she had supported her all along. She hadn't done one this year that Leanne had seen, but maybe they had her off somewhere filming a lot of different stuff. That was the way it went with actresses like Janie Knight. A year goes by, and you don't see anything, and then suddenly there are 3 flicks on HBO that have her as the main character, or as supporting actress. Janie Knight was a workhorse of the industry who got little glamour for the amount of work she did. At least that's how Leanne saw it. Janie's last flick, Bride of the Aging Mists, was a sword and sorcery spoof thing that the Bridget Nielsens and the Rutger Hauers and Arnold Schwarzeneggers occasionally get caught up in. Sort of a real Conan-esque flick. But well done, and on location in Ireland. None of the cheap tacky props. Leanne had been happy with it. She would go and see it again, if the opportunity arose. Janie had played the lead, a woman named Sabin or Sabian, something like that. Whatever. It was still a good flick. Leanne didn't know what it was exactly about Janie Knight that had attracted her so much. The woman was pretty, but not overly gorgeous. She could act, and her calm manner made the roles that she played much stronger. There was a soap-and-water cleanliness to her that Leanne liked. A sort of a good girl comes into her own attitude. An alter ego for someone like Leanne, who would never slay dragons nor get the leading man just because she had a virginality that was unstoppable. That was only in the movies. Still, Leanne secretly never gave up hope in virtue and in her own virginity, a never-ending source of pride for her mother, who held that little piece of tissue to be the worth of any unmarried woman. Leanne would always end her conversations with her mother by whispering to her that she still was, and that her mama shouldn't worry about anything like that. "I'm still a virgin, Mama," she would tell her. "I'm still a virgin." Leanne was, technically, still a virgin, despite the stretching and twisting around caused by her wishful thinking. She had all but deflowered herself in her bed at night with her own fingers. She would assault herself repeatedly as though she had no real control. That was her one release, and she never denied herself that simple act. She would make herself sore even, but that never lasted very long. That tension had to be released, and she knew how to do it. What Mother would think of that, Leanne had never had the nerve to find out. Shelley had taught her how to do it, and that was a closed shop after that. There were other things that Mother wanted to know about. Grade point averages, career development courses. Sex came and went, with a whisper of minstrel knowledge passed between mother and daughter. Nothing else had ever been discussed. But there was a singular joy to being a virgin that Leanne had been warned she would lose as soon as she had her first man. A simple joy that Leanne feared to lose. Shelley had bitterly complained of losing this ability to achieve multiple orgasm. "It's like," she had tried to explain, "I don't know, Leanne. The thrill is gone, you know? All of your fantasies you find out are just bull. Really doing it, and just feeling yourself, are way different. Once you do it, there's like this knowledge, this carnal knowledge that comes with it. A really heavy feeling comes over you, and all of the play goes out of it." She had looked at Leanne hard, like the voice of experience. Carnal knowledge is a good name for it, 'cause playtime's over. The little girl feelings are all dead, and you have to really concentrate to come like a woman. That was what was confusing me before when I would read Cosmo and stuff. See, I didn't have any problem feeling anything until I got laid. Then I had to work to get it going, and I hate that, Leanne. I hate it. Leanne recalled how her friend had been close to tears, explaining how at one time all she had to do was just strip off and stare at her body in the mirror until it would happen. And now it took more manipulation than it was worth just to climax. These thoughts never left Leanne for very long. She was now herself like Shelley used to be, multi-orgasmic, and she was terrified of losing this ability, almost as much as a man fears impotence, almost as much as that. Virginity was Leanne's safety zone, and she intended to stay in it for a while. She gathered up her books and headed for the door. The library was closing for the day, and the lights chased her out the front doors, going off behind her, one row at a time, like an evil omen. The old librarian was smiling at her, while throwing the row of switches, one at a time, for its effect on the slow readers who dawdled. What would happen, Leanne wondered, as she stepped between the tall black post-like theft detectors? What would happen if I refused to leave one evening? What would they do to me? A smile crossed her lips as she thought about what everyone would say. Little Miss Leanne Ashley broke Western in the library. She asserted herself at last. As she stepped out into the yellow and faded sunset, she saw Brenda Benton as she was throwing a red frisbee to her black Labrador retriever. The dog was a gorgeous animal of humongous proportions. She smiled. That overgrown dog trying to catch a frisbee. It was comical. "Brenda!" yelled a handsome voice from across the closely mown campus common. Leanne felt her heart drop, while her face struggled to hide it. It was him. Michael Butler. It was Michael. Leanne looked back at skinny little Brenda Benton, her upturned tits poking out of her light cotton t-shirt, giving her chest that same stupid, perky, bimbonic look that was presently on her face. Sure, she was pretty, and sure, she was pretty in ways that Leanne wasn't. But please, the girl is brain dead. She's flunking chemistry this semester, Michael, thought Leanne. Don't you know that? Apparently not. Brenda's perky pixie face and her perky pixie bosom greeted Michael with a hug. She threw her little anorexic arms around that hunk of beefcake and held on for dear life while he swung her around effortlessly. "I've been trying to call you all day, Brenda," he said, smiling at her as she wet-kissed him, nibbling his nose and chin, open-mouthed. The black Labrador jumped on them, knocking them to the ground with his surprise attack. "Down, Lucifer," squeaked Brenda. "I'll beat you, dog." But her voice had laughter in it. She looked up at Michael again as he brushed her hair sweetly from her face. Leanne felt her knees weaken. She had often fantasized in the bathtub that he was doing that to her. "You have to call real earlier," said Brenda, tartly. "I don't lay around on my butt all day. I go places and do things. I grow old waiting on you to get out of the sack, boy." They giggled, and Leanne considered turning away before they did the thing. No, she would have to watch the thing. She would have to punish herself and watch. It would be the only fuel her lonely sex life would get, so she better not miss it. They did the thing, and Leanne felt her sex quiver. They looked at each other with their liquid, just-discovered the opposite sex eyes, and then they kissed, full-mouthed, deep and long. There was actual, audible suction in their kiss. Leanne swallowed in shame. She could turn away now and leave if she wanted to, but she didn't. She had a photographic memory, and she was recording this live footage for later tonight. She would replay this scene in her mind on the screen of her closed eyelids. A cool, quiet, darkened room in which she would lie naked under her sheet, and in her total privacy she would relive it again. Her hand would orchestrate the entire event, conducting her favorite rhythm and bringing her to a powerful end, just like a symphony. Then she would do it again, if she felt like it, before she went to sleep. It was cheap and slutty, but she didn't care. She was a good girl all the rest of the time. If she felt really wicked, she would use her hand mirror. Kiss her, you hunk. Make her wet her pants. Take her breath away. Leanne stared until her arms grew numb under the weight of her books. It was her way just lately, and it was scaring her a little. She had been having fantasies about women getting brutalized, and sometimes the woman was herself. She was having rape fantasies, and she didn't really like it. But now she was watching Michael overpower this small little tart with the thin arms. Give it to her, thought Leanne. She said it out loud and was unaware she had said anything, but the sound of her voice was enough to bring her out of her trance. She put her books in the crook of her other arm and turned away from this scene of passion before her. The couple hadn't heard her say anything. Leanne walked away from the pair as they lay together, tasting each other. It was enough to make Leanne sexually violent. She can count on one hand, she thought, the time she'd been kissed on the mouth by boys, and she had only been touched by a boy down there once. Every so often she would try to recall what that had been like. She had only been 11 years old at the time, and she had no idea what the boy was going to do until he had invaded the elastic of her underpants. He was only there for just a second, and then his small fingers had darted away again. She had been underdeveloped at the time, and for the most part she had missed whatever sensation he had fumblingly tried to give her. All she recalled about the boy after that was his shame as they would pass each other in the hallway of their elementary school. All she knew was how much she enjoyed seeing his face color over every time he passed her, and how that would turn her on. She had been fantasizing his shame over touching her like that for years. It was a well-worn fantasy. Threadbare, in fact. Time for another touch, Leanne, she would tell herself. Later, after college, after I get a good job, after I turn 30, She would be 30 soon. She was only 25 now, but in 5 years she was going to be 30. That sounded awful. Instead of feeling pride that she was about to get her bachelor's degree with honors, she felt dejected. It didn't matter so much now, the degree. Not like before when she was 18. She had gone to a finishing school for 3 years after getting out of high school, and that had delayed her getting her bachelor's degree until now. The finishing school had taught her not to depend upon the male sex so much for support. This was an idea that her mother supported, because she had been to that school herself. That was why Leanne had to go and take classes with a bunch of snobbish, wannabe male feminists who were more interested in girls than careers, men, or anything else. Leanne had tolerated the finishing school, this Vassar-like institute, where all the girls were made to wear uniforms and the mistresses had been strict. Leanne really had no problem with this. Her study habits had always been impeccable. She would be ready for UCLA when she graduated, and the finishing school would give her an edge in the job market because of the intense skills she'd had to learn. Leanne was fluent in 3 major languages, and she could pass any entrance exam to any law school that came her way. Leanne had become a jack of all trades and a master of none as a result of her finishing school. She was beginning to see how useless all of that was. Pretension was the only reason for going to finishing school, she now knew. But her mother would have an aneurysm if she knew Leanne felt like that. Oh well, the ability to show off and the ability to land a terrific job were miles apart, in theory and in practice. She could have been working on a master's by now, or even a doctorate, but her mother had been firm. The finishing school had to come first, and in those days, Leanne did nothing but please her folks. "I want to get laid," she told herself. This thought interrupted her fantasy of the 2 kissers back there on the old library common. It stuck in her mind like a small blackberry seed between her teeth. She wanted it, didn't she? Forget the loss of sensation and the loss of self-inflicted multiple orgasm. Maybe if she had a man, 1 orgasm would be enough. Maybe. She thought of Brenda back there. Brenda was getting porked by Michael, Leanne would testify. She just knew she was. Yet the professor of chemistry would let Brenda slide this semester, like all semesters, by the skin of her pretty little butt. As usual, Brenda would be throwing her frisbee to that dog and laughing in her high, squeaky voice, and pass. She would have all of the fun and none of the work. All the while people like Leanne worked and had none of the fun. That was the way it went. This must cease, Leanne told herself. Leanne could have had a man, and she knew it, but none of the ones who wanted her were somehow good enough. They were just a little too geeky for Leanne. They weren't like Michael Butler at all. They didn't drive bitchin' blue Mustangs and smell of safari. They didn't act sane and calm and drive a girl wild with a smile or a slow, steady wink. No, they were all at home at night, pounding their puds over some porno magazine and forgetting to wear their deodorant a couple of times a week. They all still sweated like the little boys they were, because they were all still freshmen. None of the upperclassmen had approached Leanne. All she'd had come near her were these out-of-high-school nerds looking to give her a thrill. Some previous high school senior with his high school case of acne and his leering, unstable eyes. Some jerk with an elderly Volkswagen or something not found in nature, like a, heaven forbid, Carmen Gia, painted in rad colors like puke green or crap gold. No thank you. Boys like Mark Rogers and Carl Coston simply were not her speed. Her own self-abuse was preferable. The virgin snob has decreed it, she said to herself. The graduate of Miss Jennifer Tomlinson's finishing school would not defile herself with bourgeois data processing majors. She would not condescend to this level of business students, who had done their first 2 years at some dear little community college or other, to save money to buy that aging Volkswagen. No way. It was Michael or bust, and she would hold out. Thank you very much. If nothing happened in her life before she actually hit 30, then she would change her standards to somehow include the Tommy Martin types, who were at least mortgaging their balls to the wall to get a Toyota or an older Mazda. Yeah, she would then go to Plan B, but for now she still had time. She looked at her watch again. 5:15. She continued on down the campus, where she saw a flyer stapled to a tree that declared, "Bride of the Aging Mists this evening at the Legion." All right. About time they got something worth watching at the Legion. Leanne considered changing her plans for the evening. She could read her book on Saturday night. Friday night was movie night at the Legion, and all of the college kids could get in for $1. She couldn't pass that up. Janie Knight and all. Oh, yeah. She really needed to see her mentor again. She needed to sit in the dark and be Janie Knight for a few minutes. Just pretend like that was herself up there on the silver screen. She didn't look too much like Janie, but she did look like her in a way. There was the innocence, and there was the well-scrubbed, simple good looks. No real wicked beauty nor anything like that. Just nice features. Yeah, Leanne might have been a stunt double for the star, if Leanne had been so inclined. And Janie wasn't married. That led Leanne to fantasize that Janie Knight might even be as big a virgin as Leanne was. The possibility was there, but not the likelihood. Janie had to be, 33 years old. If the lust of her late 20s had been as strong as Leanne's was getting to be, the chances of her still being pure were next to none. Still, Leanne identified with Janie and admired her very much. Leanne finally made it to her small, almost off-campus dormitory, which was nothing more than a run-down apartment building with concrete and cinder block walls. She let herself in and sighed deeply. There was something wonderful to be said for being home again, but right now she was just too pooped to say it. Secretly, she did love living alone. She was just selfish enough to really groove on it, and were it not for her impossible sex drive, she could say to the world, "Kiss my tail, I don't need any of you for anything." But she couldn't do that. Leanne was very sexual, and that urge, while it can be a solitary thrill, wasn't meant for that. It was meant to be a social device, to bring people closer together. Leanne would have to realize that and act upon it sooner or later, but not tonight. "Tonight I shall shower," she said, "and then go to the Legion. I shall buy a terrifically large box of buttered popcorn and a large Sprite, and I shall absorb myself into the Bride of the Aging Mists once again. And I won't come out until it's over. Not even if I have to pee. I'll wait." Rachel Blackwelder. Character Study. Janie Knight lit a long, slender cigarette and blew smoke at the lines on the page that she was reading. The smoke slammed against the page and imploded into itself, rolling up into itself again like a cannon blast. The booklet still smelled new, with that almost toxic mimeograph smell that occasionally she liked to sniff. Janie Knight loved to sniff things, especially musky things. She loved rich, deep smells like that. Her mother would often complain that, as a child, Janie had to sniff everything. "Why do you always have to be smelling everything?" she would demand of Janie. But she never managed to get Janie to stop it. Janie loved to smell her own fingers after touching something volatile. The scratch and sniff toys had been among her favorites. Janey sat now, reading, smoke rolling out of her nostrils like tiny twin serpents of white. She looked up and closed her eyes, and she rubbed them. Ah, she was tired. A weak sigh escaped out of her throat. She didn't want to read this tonight, but she knew she'd better. Time was running out, and they started filming next week. She looked over at her dresser and saw the plot of Peaceful Valley, where it had been laying unread for the last month. She should have read it, she knew, but she didn't have the time, and when she did have the time, she wanted to sleep or listen to her new Macintosh stereo equipment that she had purchased a year ago and had never fully enjoyed. A novel wasn't the way Janey liked to spend her spare time, even if it was in the line of duty. Okay, she thought, so I didn't read the novel. I really didn't have to, but I have to read this screenplay, so best not to fight it. She flipped her character study over again and read the cover. The plot of Peaceful Valley. Wonderful. Sounded way too much like Bride of the Aging Mists to suit her. And what would such a title actually have to do with the story anyway? The longer the title, she had noticed, the less it had to do with anything. Long titles were pretentious and arrogant. They served to say nothing. She sniffed her cigarette, sniffing the mentholated butt, and tossed it into the ashtray. Then she lit another one. Rachel. Tall, dark beauty with a strong body, dark auburn hair, stylishly cut in long ringlets. Costumed in a series of period 1890s dresses, long rakish boots of eel-skin leather. She is confident and self-assured, which tends to hide her inner weakness. Rachel can get suicidal at times. Who doesn't? Asked Janey of herself. Protective and in search of someone to mother, she is a solid character in most ways, but feels empty since the death of her husband. Who wouldn't? Asked Janey, taking a deep drag off her cigarette, causing the fire to crackle with the rolled, scented paper as it turned to ash. She read all about Rachel Blackwelder and felt an empathy for her. The role would be a good one for Janey, and if son of a gun if it didn't have a little serious drama to it. Sure, it was her standard offering from a Hollywood that saw her as another Red Sonja or Wonder Woman. And sure, this movie was going to get fantasy-laden before too long, and fall into the sci-fi category of a million rental flick shelves. But so what? They were paying her well for this one. She could do it. Look at Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. It was possible to emerge from the great boogaboo flicks and do a Gorillas in the Mists eventually. Jamie Lee Curtis had, after all, survived Halloween. It could be done. Timing. That was everything. Timing. Serious roles would come in time. Janey saw some similarities between Rachel and herself, and this always did help her get into character. Janey became the character she portrayed, and Rachel, being similar to herself, it was easy to understand why Rachel would do this or that. Janey had been trained by a terrific drama coach in college, and she had followed the teaching advice concerning characterization. Think your character all the way through, Miss Manson would tell her. The character does only certain things in a script, but it is up to the actress to be more than that, Janey. You have to think what your character would do outside of the role and outside of the lines. You have to make up a complete life for your part. For example, the part of Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music. She was a young girl who loved life. Now, picture Julie Andrews mad. Mad enough to spank one of those small children. How would she do it, Janie? How would she do it? Janie had had to think before she answered, but this drama coach always did get an answer, and then a reason as to why you gave her the answer you gave. Tell us, Janie, how would Julie Andrews spank a child? Well, said Janie, she wouldn't do it. No, said the teacher, not good enough. We're talking mad. Now you think, what is an acceptable way for Maria von Trapp, Julie Andrews, to spank a child? How would Julie have handled the part? Janie swallowed. She would sit down and put the young boy across her knee and pop his butt 5 or 6 times. Why the boy? Came the tart reply. Why not one of the girls? Why didn't Julie Andrews spank one of the girl children? Because, said Janie, I don't know. Think, said the teacher. Use your imagination, girl. Open that third eye. Use it. It's in the middle of your head. It's the gateway of imagination. Open the third eye. In that moment, suddenly, Janie could see Julie Andrews spanking the youngest girl in the movie, the really cute one. Janie had imagined the child throwing a temper tantrum and swinging out at Maria von Trapp, Julie Andrews' character. Now she could see Julie grabbing the child's arm and whipping her around to face her. She could see the child looking away defiantly and pouting, and then she could see Julie spinning the child around and flinging her against the bed. They were standing in that upstairs bedroom, the one in the movie. Now she could see Julie smacking the child's rump. The horror of it was, Julie was spanking the girl harder than the boy would have been spanked. When he'd only gotten 5 or 6 swats, the girl was up to 15 already. Janie blinked in dismay at what she was seeing unfolding in her mind. She swallowed hard and looked at her teacher, who was smiling triumphantly. Ah, Janie, you see it, don't you? Now you see it. You're going to be a terrific actress one day, Janie. You opened the third eye. You now know what I mean. In her mind's eye, she could see the repentant Julie Andrews as she hugged the punished child up close to her, asking her forgiveness. Julie was back as the fun-loving girl again, crying even harder than the spanked child was crying. But Janie had seen it. Yes. Janie knew now why she didn't want to see little Gretel get her butt spanked. This was back in the late 30s. Girls were not as important as boys, and the code of conduct forgave misbehavior in boys much more easily than in girls. Julie would have expected some misbehavior out of a male child, but the female child was to be repressed into behaving like a lady or else. Women were taught and punished much more severely than their male counterparts. Julie Andrews had, for a moment, acted exactly like a governess of her day would have acted, influenced by Nazi Germany all around her. But it was much more than that. Julie Andrews would have never spanked any of the Von Trapp children, even if they needed it. The directors of the movie would not have allowed it. That movie was made for art, not real life. What the drama coach had asked Janie to do was rip away the false niceness of The Sound of Music and go back to the real Von Trapp home. The real Von Trapp home in Austria. There was such a place. Visualize the actual Maria von Trapp as she sought to discipline the errant child. When Janie had visualized Maria spanking Gretel, she had seen the 2 actresses from the original movie acting out the roles, and Janie had seen the truth as well. Maria would have spanked Gretel, and Janie had seen exactly how she would have done it. Now it was all clear. That was the way to visualize the scripts that she would receive. Make the character do something other than what the character would normally do, and then respond in character to the situation. Then she could more closely understand all of the characters' motivations and perceptions. Janey had never gotten over the image of Julie Andrews spanking Gretel von Trapp. It was an anachronism. It wasn't natural. And yet it helped her to see exactly how it would have happened. Maria would have done exactly like Janey had pictured it, given what they knew about Maria von Trapp. She would have cried, maybe, but she would have done it. She would have done it because of the tense times of the Nazi Germany they lived in. She would have done it to make Gretel be a good little girl. And the drama coach had known that Janey had once been a daughter herself. She would have known that women tend to brutalize other women more than they do the men. Women hold each other to higher standards. Don't get dirty, little missy, and don't talk back. That sort of conditioning.